Okay. Let's see. Hopefully this will fix everything. Okay. I'm trying this again, you all. Thank you for being patient. Okay, Okay, can you hear me now, Habib? Hey, Kyla. Oh, I'm glad you joined Jushada. I think I saw you yesterday in the live. I believe I'm going to be answering your questions. Between both myself and Habib Akande, we're definitely going to get your questions answered. Hey, good to see you. Come in and join in. Come in and join in. Yes, I'm so glad to have you all here today. So I just gotta change up. Can y'all hear me? I love you too. Can you all hear me now? Is it better? My volume is going in and out again. I don't know what to do. Habib, can you hear me?
I can hear
No?
you loud and clear.
Okay.
Hi, Elena. How are you?
Wonderful. Very good. I'm trying to make sure that like sound is good because I'm getting mixed signals on whether or not it's on and off. But if like I'm talking at all and you can't hear me, shut me down immediately. Like wave to me so I know that I need to stop talking.
No, I can hear you. The sound is much better. It's much better. I
Okay.
like to hear a volume today.
Oh yes. Do you like that? I did this for you. I threw some effort into it. So let's go ahead and kick this off. We've got people that have joined us today. And I just kind of wanted to like ground in first and just like share a little bit about what's led me to this moment to have you on, at least over the last couple weeks. And then, yes, thanks for answering questions. Okay. And then I guess we can like go back and forth with checking in on questions that come up in the feed because it looks like people are going to be active today. So I just wanted to share that, over the last couple of weeks, I've been sharing a series on the secrets of women, speaking to the cyclical attunement and magic of women, the changes that are witnessed and felt during our symbiotic flow of hormone and physiological ecology. I've been shining a light on self-reverence in terms of what makes each one of us so unique and beyond desirable, dynamic gardens of cosmic pleasure. So today seems like the most perfect moment to like bring you into the fold in your work and just have this a beautiful collaborative communion on um, intimacy, on uh, self-acceptance and appreciation, uh, the interplay of love and connecting, slowing things down, and the culture um, that exists in all areas of the world between yourself and myself and the places that we've been to when it comes to pleasure. You all, so officially welcoming Habib Akande. He is a sex expert, historian, erotologist. He's a best-selling author of at least 7 books. I think that there's probably more books out there that you have that you just haven't like unloaded to us. But today we're going to deep dive into Kunyaza, the secret to female pleasure. And you guys, I found Habib's work quite some time ago. And then when I did my yoga, sex, and rituals tour with Baha Yogi, I reached out to Habib and I was like, I need like 20 of your books because I want to use them for context in the workshops that I was teaching. And I tell you, like, everyone went wild and what I loved most is how curious and inspired women became after reading like excerpts out of the book, and the desire to want to explore their bodies and see bodies in a different way, and like so many factors of how I integrated it. So let's get right into it. Let's get right into it. Can you still hear me good?
I can hear you. Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I know like probably everyone asks you the like most basic question starting off, but why why did you decide to write this book and publish this for the world? Um, what happened around you where you felt like, okay, this is needed, this and it needs to be in proximity to the book?
Great question. And again, before I answer, just wanted to say thank you. Send my thanks for inviting me on your platform. And I've told you personally, privately, but I just want to say publicly as well that I appreciate you and the work that you're doing, and to continue doing it. Your work is much appreciated and it's beneficial. So just wanted to say that from the outset. But in terms of why I published this book, I probably might need to explain a little bit about some previous what got me interested into erotology and exploring different cultures and how their approaches towards not only sex and intimacy but different cultural practices towards pleasure, especially female pleasure. My third book was on exploring sexuality and erotology, but from an Islamic or religious perspective, because I wanted to understand what does the religion of Islam say about sex, especially female pleasure. And then I wrote another book, mainly looking at erotology, but from an African and Arab perspective, not really from a religious perspective. And one of my readers contacted me and asked me why didn't I mention erotology, since I was speaking about different cultural practices both in Africa and in the Arabian world about sensuality, especially female sensuality. And I did what most people do when they come across something relatively new. I Googled it. So I Googled Kunyaza and I came across, I saw a number of articles and I came across, this wonderful pleasure positive practice that, yes, there are some promises that it helps women experience sexual pleasure, orgasms, squirting and things like that. But what really I was fascinated by is that this was a practice that was centered primarily around Black women, Black African women, where they were telling their stories. They were talking about the importance of women experiencing sexual pleasure in their marital relations. And the onus was on men to ensure that they bring their wives to sexual pleasure and create an atmosphere and environment where women do feel, as you mentioned in the beginning, desired, appreciated, and they can be pleasurable beings. So for me, this was quite interesting because oftentimes the narrative around African sexuality in particular is a lot of negative stories or things like, which again we're well aware of and does need to be eradicated, but this was a different narrative, whereas again women that were owning a narrative and they were speaking about where their bodies, their pleasure was centered, and men, you could say, was bowing down to female pleasure in the sense, and the onus was on men to ensure that their wives were, or their female partners were sexually satisfied, and they embraced different types of labia and female genitalia, which we can talk a little bit later. So I thought, okay, this will be quite interesting because I saw a number of articles, some in English. I saw a book in French and German, but I had not seen anything in English. And at the time, there was a documentary that was being produced about Kunyaza. I reached out to the filmmaker at the time. He's Belgian, and I asked him because I wanted to know more about the practice. I reached out as well to a couple of my friends from Uganda and another one that I know who's from Kenyan descent to understand, okay, what is this Kunyaza practice? How come you've got this wonderful pleasure positive practice that centers female sensuality? The onus is on men to learn from a relatively young age about women's anatomy and how they can create an environment where they can ensure women experience pleasure. The technique itself, I was quite intrigued, but it wasn't really the technique, it was the culture around it. So I just really wanted to understand that. And I thought it would be good because, like I said, I haven't come across a book in English on the topic. I wanted to pay homage to not only the Kunyaza tradition, but especially the Black women, the Black African women, who mainly has been teaching this particular tradition for generations, and also to amplify their voices as well as the voices of other, especially people of color, because generally within I'm sure you're well aware, but within the when we talk about studies towards human sexuality or erotology, we don't really hear about the voices and experiences of brown and black women, or brown and black peoples in particular. So I thought this would be really interesting to kind of try and capture in the form of a book, not only the contributions that black people have made, but also talk about some common or contemporary approaches towards female pleasure, and even the contemporary approaches towards female ejaculation and squirting, because in the West, there's a lot of stigma towards this bodily experience, whereas in, like I said, in Rwanda and parts of Africa where it's normalized and celebrated, it can give a different stance and approach the way we view women's sexual experiences, and which I think should be normalized. So, in a nutshell, that's the reason why I wanted to write the book. Because I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to pay homage to Kunyaza and the teachers, especially the black female sex educators who have preserved this tradition, and again, to hopefully inspire people so they can look into other cultures and other practices that can help celebrate women's pleasure and hopefully close the orgasm gap.
Yeah. Thank God that you did, right? Because I think like these are, every single thing that you touch are all central conversations that I have one-on-one with female clients, with male clients, with the couple. And so it's very much needed. And what's interesting to me is that when we talk, like we have to like break this out into so many parts, right? When we talk about, we can talk about the mechanics of it all day long, right? People are like, how does this happen? How is it achieved within 5 minutes? You know, what do I need to do to become masterful of this, right? And we can get into that whole conversation of mechanics. I think what's something that I wanted to really explore is like, is this just a mechanical mastery of practice and ritual, or are there other that feed into this, right? And so when I'm talking with women here in the United States around pleasure, what I'm noticing is that because women are not accessing pleasure just within the mundane, everyday aspect of their life, that it becomes really difficult to access when they are in intimate and physical experiences with men or with their partner, whoever you choose, right? And so, you know, I constantly find myself teaching rituals of appreciation and mindfulness. And, you know, the play is like, if you stay ready, if you're in the uh, experiencing of pleasure, then it's a lot more easy to access, right? Um, and when we go into that, you know, I'm blown away by how wowed everyone is about the little things that matter, from the moment that you wake up till the time that you go to sleep. I think also that here a lot of melanated Black women are challenged with um, asking for what they want, exploring pleasure, um, constantly dealing with oppressive and suppressive um, traumas. And so, like, I believe in over here, we have a lot of barriers to break down. And I think that I am curious to see how the integration of Kunyaza would help to be a part of that process. A few things down that I imagine, like for women and couples here, that would be beneficial of the practice of Kunyaza. Increasing the potential of time for intimate bonding, right? So just because we know that this practice can create a female ejaculation in 5 minutes, it doesn't mean that that is the intention of just making a woman ejaculate in 5 minutes and then being done. Um, I thought it to be also a creative experience for non-penetrative sex as well. Um, to become masterful in pull-out methods, right? For avoiding or planning pregnancy, or prolonging pleasure, and slowing things down, an opportunity to explore the anatomy of your partner, to really become masterful of your partner, right? Because a lot of people come to relationships bringing everything that they learned, and they find that they have to unlearn everything that their previous partner or partners liked, just to really connect on a deeper level, right?
Mm.
And so I see just from the positioning and the visualization, how that can leave such an incredible imprint, not only from a visual perspective, but from an internal perspective of like seeing, experiencing, and edging. And then, of course, acceptance and body positivity, self-love of the anatomy. I remember being on I just closed out all my notes. I remember being on a live when I was in LA and talking about acceptance of the body and exploration of vulvas, right? And how some women have negative responses to how their body looks because um, they can't see themselves in the Barbie dolls that are designed, or pornography that's put out there. Like we're out there, they're getting reconstruction of their vulvas to make it look like the social imprints that are all around us. And there was a woman, when I shared with her about labia pulling, she literally like had a complete meltdown, but was so thankful because she was scheduled to go get surgery the way she looked, right? So when I think the power of this book that you bring forward, I'm like, it hits all of the things, right? It hits so many aspects of it. Like I almost get emotional thinking about like the freedom that this practice of Kunyaza can can give to human beings about their body, especially Black bodies in the United States, and in the way that we're targeted, whether it's shows up in mortality, whether it shows up in unnecessary diagnosis for hysterectomies. Like our bodies are constantly being targeted for um, for science and other reasons. So it's just a beautiful way to like really dive deep into this, and then it like converts into my work in fertility awareness in so many different ways. But we'll get into that later. Yeah.
Yeah, can I touch on that point? Yeah, I think it's really important, especially as, Black, brown, melanated people. We do control the narrative, and especially when it comes to the anatomy and body positivity. And I think we need to decolonize human sexuality, especially how it's taught in the West. And like you mentioned, and the way, and unfortunately, the way, and I'll put in inverted commas, science or scientists have demonized Black bodies, both the Black male body and the Black female body. I think it's important that we take ownership in terms of these stories, and especially when we're speaking about the female anatomy. So, and that's something which it's interesting that you spoke about, and we did speak about this previously, about the importance of women understanding or appreciating the diversity of the vulva. And also it's important that men understand that as well, that women need to understand it in terms of for self-acceptance, and understand that beauty comes in different shapes and sizes. And as well as for men to understand that as well, because unfortunately, if a number of men obviously have been watching a lot of adult content, and they've seen a certain type of anatomy, and even some of our textbooks that will show like a symmetrical lips, will think that's the norm. We're not realizing that in reality, most women do not have symmetrical lips, and it's perfectly fine. and understanding that in different cultures they have different norms. So I was listening to I think she's a gynecologist or plastic surgeon recently, and she's American based. She was talking about, she went to a conference in I think in Asia, and she was talking about, so she said there was her, obviously an American, an Asian lady who also is a cosmetic surgeon, and there was also an African cosmetic surgeon, and they all do different forms of like labiaplasty or to that effect. And what she was struck by was that, because she said in the US, from her experience, like this so-called Barbie doll with so-called tucked-in lips is like seen as the cultural ideal. But then she noticed that amongst in Asia, she said that the Asian plastic surgeon spoke about the ideal was like a butterfly shape. Like they preferred protruding lips. They didn't have this issue that women had to be tucked in. So she was speaking about that's a different cultural ideal. And then she spoke about the African plastic surgeon who was talking about the cultural ideal in some parts of Africa is to have elongated protruding lips, and all of them are perfectly normal. All of them are fine. So it's important that we, irrespective of where we are in the world, we understand that the vulva comes different shapes and sizes, so we can, especially for the women, can embrace however theirs look, and also for their male partners to understand and appreciate that, rather than just thinking that it should look one way. Because one of the questions I do often receive, like when I do workshops, is what is a normal vagina or normal labia or normal vulva? And again, it's quite disheartening because normal comes in different shapes and sizes. But if people haven't been told that, and especially I'll put it to the men as well, especially for the men who've had maybe multiple sexual partners, I'm sure they would know that there's not just one type. So you shouldn't be horrified or make fun or ridicule if a woman's lips look slightly different from a previous partner. And it's important that men reassure their female partners, because it's one thing and it's great that women are reaching self-acceptance amongst themselves, but I think men, we've also got to play a part, especially obviously for heterosexual women, because if a woman's obviously intimate with a man and he's making her feel that she's not normal and this, that, and the other, it can destroy her self-esteem. So this is why I like to put a lot of onus and emphasis on men to educate themselves in terms of normal comes different shapes and sizes, and to make sure that we complement our partner's anatomy. So that's something that, again, I think there's a lot that needs to be done in that regard. And just even when I reflect on the story of Sarah Bartman, this is why I say it's important that we have melanated and brown and black people speaking about our experiences, is because when you look at how her anatomy was considered to be somewhat deformed because it didn't fit in with the Western or white woman's ideal. And even up until very recently, a woman who had elongated lips was considered to be deformed when it's perfectly normal. And if a woman had, again, when I say not enlarged, but larger than maybe what they considered to be normal, a clitoral glands, they called it clitoromegaly, which is like a so-called medical condition. So there's all of these medical conditions that are not really a deformity, but unfortunately, maybe because a person, and in many cases it's Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Americans, Anglo-Europeans, are maybe looking at others, whether it's brown and black people, and then because maybe our bodies may be slightly different to what they consider to be the norm, we're kind of seen as like other than, and so that's why it's important that, again, like I said, we've got people like yourselves who are taking the narrative into controlling our own bodies, and letting other black people and brown people know that there's nothing wrong with us.
Absolutely. And not for nothing, Habib, the thing is that your clitoris, I mean, your vulva is an extension of your pleasure, right? I think that the shape is a roadmap to the pleasure that exists with it, right? Because like most people, identify the clitoris with just like the clitoral hood, not even understand like the entire vulva vegetables that are underneath the vulva that expand, right? And give shape to the erected anatomy of the woman. So it's very interesting, like to see that how the lack of anatomy teaching can take away from the experience of pleasure. In my opinion, like sometimes more is a lot better than less, right? And like there's sensations. There's going to be a different level of sensation for both partners when it comes to the anatomy of the vulva, right? So that's something that we have to talk about too. And you bring that up in the book, like the actual sensations of how men experience vulvas that are elongated. Would you talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So, and you did touch on it earlier. So, in parts of not only Rwanda but Uganda and Kenya, they have a practice known as kukuna. Well, that's what it's called in Rwanda,
Mm-hmm.
where from a relatively young age, girls are taught prior to marriage to elongate their labia, and the whole idea is that it's supposed to not only enhance sexual pleasure for both the man and the woman during intimate relations, but also it's considered to be more aesthetically pleasing, which is again quite different from like what we're kind of used to in the West, where elongated lips that protrudes again is considered to be more beautiful. So it's not only done for beautification purposes, but also it's supposed to increase pleasure for both the man and the woman, and it's considered to be when the man is prior to engaging in any form of intercourse with his partner, he plays with the genitalia, he plays with the lips, and again because they don't have this, and that's why again it's important we explain this the context of it is because, like you said, if I'm explaining this in the West, some people may think first and foremost, okay, how can you do that? Isn't that troublesome? Isn't that that's not attractive? But it's a different cultural understanding in terms of beauty, and also it's important that, for example, if a woman doesn't feel comfortable with having long lips, before we get into any form of physical contact, it's important that she finds acceptance and self-love in the way she looks, and the man also is able to help her find and be reassured in terms of the way she looks. So that's why the psychology of Kunyaza is just important as the so-called mechanic, shall we say. But yeah, so coming back to how women and girls are from a relatively young age, they're taught to elongate their lips. And similar to what you said, the longer the better, and it was considered to be the bigger it is, and the more voluptuous and the different shapes. It wasn't like seen as there's only one ideal that has to be a certain length. It was elongate to whichever is considered to be comfortable for the woman and the man alike. But they didn't see it as anything as distasteful or anything like that. It was actually kind of seen as attractive. And there are some recent studies that has actually showed that um, women with elongated labia, because like you said, there's also nerve endings there as well as obviously there is in the clitoris, women can experience more pleasure, more sensation. So it's just quite interesting, like I said, where in different parts of the world where some women want to get rid of their labia, and again, I can understand the reasons why. Whereas in other cultures, it's actually embraced, and that's something that I definitely think we can learn from, especially for women who have got elongated labia to kind of embrace it, irrespective of whether they manually elongate it, but just the fact that elongated labia, long lips is beautified, seen as attractive, and it's just as attractive as women who've got tucked in lips. So it's, again, it's just very interesting, like I said, where different cultural narrative where they embrace um, again long lips, elongated labia, and again it's considered to be just as beautiful as a woman who's got tucked in lips as it's viewed in the Western world.
Absolutely. And we're for all that are on the line, like this is actually an intentional,
Yeah,
progressive practice, right?
yeah,
It's we're not talking about women that are just born with elongated labia. We're talking about a practice in which women intentionally elongate their labias, and it's not something that is just personal. It's like a shared experience with daughters and mothers and aunties and things like that that are almost like an initiation into pleasure, an initiation into sex, an initiation into womanhood, right? Um, and but then when you think about the mechanics that involve, we're talking about consistent stimulation and circulation of blood, of lymph, of nutrients, of oxygen to the pelvis through this action. So now we're like talking from a health perspective, how this creates a luscious garden for your entire pelvic floor. And what a lot of people don't understand, that some of the reasons why they can't access orgasms has to do with, like, it can have to do with simple body alignment, right? There's so many different neural access points for orgasms, right? Like vaginal, clitoral, right? Um, there's there's like several, right? But it has to do with all of the nerve endings. And if you lack circulation, or your body is misaligned, or you've been in a car accident, or you're not stimulating your entire pelvic floor, or you are not, like for women that are practicing celibacy, right? If you are not experiencing penetration, if you don't have a self ceremony practice, the tissues that you have that are lining your entire pelvic floor and your organs, they will begin to like disintegrate. You don't use them, they lose them. So this is also like a powerful, healthy for women that can support like a lot of womb issues that women have as well, because you're constantly bringing in blood and nutrients and oxygen to a space. You're in constant contact with your body. Your awareness of womb, your awareness of intuition, your awareness of the changes that are happening in your body are different, right? There's a mechanical aspect. You're looking at your vulva. There's vulva gazing, being seen, you're being witnessed, you're being adored for this. So like it is, I love this practice because it brings about so much attention and nurture to the entire pelvic region of the body for women. So I love it. I love it for that as well. So I'm so glad that you brought that forward into the book. Um, I wanted to ask you a few questions from a cultural perspective, like for men and then for women. So, first question is, because this is an expectation of men to be able to master with women, um, does this mastery also translate to a man being ready for marriage? Is this like an initiatory practice of preparing to be a partner, a husband to a woman on an intimate level? And if there is a lack of mastery, what happens next? Like, is our elders involved? Are brothers involved with the man? Like, how does this? Is this a community conversation that takes place to maintain the accountability? How did it get to be so much pressure for men? I say pressure for men. But how did this become a ritual and an expectation for men, and how is it protected so that the tradition continues?
Great question. Great question. So before answering that, just again by way of somewhat backgrounds, it's important to understand that in generally in African cultures where Kunyaza and Gukuna is practiced, traditional African cultures, both in East Central Africa and parts of West Africa, marriage is, although it's between two people, it's also between families.
Mm-hmm.
And marriage is a form of responsibility as well. So it's not just about sexual pleasure. And part of the man's role is considered that a man's role is obviously to be a provider, both in a financial sense, but also in a form of providing sexual satisfaction for his wife. And that's where obviously Kunyaza Gukuna comes in. So whilst, and it's not necessarily that the man has to have mastery over the woman. He has to have mastery in terms of the practice to help the woman experience pleasure. Because there's a difference between the two. Because a man could be a master of Kunyaza, so to speak, but for different reasons, he might not be able to get to that with one particular woman. It doesn't mean that anything's necessarily wrong with the woman or anything's wrong with him. It's just that maybe there's not that connection. So it's important to kind of understand that. So, and whilst you did touch on the women, and girls would get together with elder women in their community, generally with aunts who are known as sengas, who would be like the sex educators, who will not only go through the Gukuna process, but also Kunyaza, and teach women about their anatomy and their right to sexual pleasure and their right to sexual fulfillment. So women from a relatively young age will feel entitled to pleasure. So when they do go into the marital home, it's not this issue where they don't feel they're entitled to pleasure and sex is just for the man. They've got an equal right to experience sexual fulfillment as well as their husbands. And then the men, on the other hand, from a relatively young age, they are took away with older men, generally their uncles, known as codgers in the community, who are like the sex uncles, sex educated uncles, who are teaching men about the importance of women's sexual satisfaction, understanding the female anatomy, and not to be like a bull in a corner shop, so to speak, in terms of just thinking about your own pleasure, making sure that you're delaying your pleasure to ensure that your wife is sexually satisfied too. So hopefully when the man and the woman, enter the marital home, hopefully they'll have some understanding. Both the woman feels entitled to pleasure and the man understands the importance of ensuring that his wife is sexually satisfied. Now, where you have issues, and you will have some issues or instances where maybe the woman is struggling to experience pleasure or climax or ejaculate or what have you, sometimes you might have elders in the community who come and try and they can speak to in terms of trying to alleviate the situation, because sometimes it can be quite difficult to talk amongst themselves, but there are other people in the community who can mediate between the couple. And what's really interesting is that because of their attitude towards sex is that, and again, it's not like a blame is placed purely on the woman or blame placed purely on the man. If there's a disconnect, there's someone else who they can speak to, who will be forthcoming and try and understand. They can mediate between the two. But interestingly, because especially like I said, where Kunyaza and Gukuna is heavily practiced, because the onus is placed on the man to ensure that his wife is sexually satisfied. If, for example, the wife doesn't experience sexual pleasure or doesn't ejaculate, oftentimes the man is blamed, and the woman sometimes will say that I want a divorce, and she will try and remarry, because it's very different to maybe like the Western concept where oftentimes the woman is blamed, whereas in this case, generally, the man is kind of said that you're supposed to facilitate or create an environment where she can experience pleasure, because as one famous Rwandan sexologist, she mentioned that 80 to 90% of women have got the ability to gush fluid, have the ocean within them, and the onus is on the man to help open the door, so to speak. So because of that expectation, shall we say, oftentimes it's the woman that is, I mean, the man that's, you could say, blamed, because he's held responsible that you couldn't help her get to this situation. Now there are some instances where the man might blame the woman, but because generally it's expected that women have this capability, women have this ability. If you're not able to help her get there, it's not that she doesn't have the water or she's dry because that's the way she is. It's because you haven't created an environment, whether maybe because she doesn't feel safe enough with you, there's not enough connection, or you haven't been patient enough when you're performing Kunyaza to help her experience this pleasure. So again, for me, it's really interesting because although sex takes place generally between the two people, but also when we speak about pleasure, it involves the community. Because like I said, if a woman is considered to be sexually dissatisfied, then you're bringing others in the community to try and help the couple kind of bridge that gap and find comfort with one another. Again, if that doesn't materialize, then obviously they can by all means go their own separate ways. But there were cultures like this are very comfortable with talking about sex and pleasure. And sex isn't just about procreation. So it's not just about the woman's there to birth children. She's there to experience, like I said, connection and sexual pleasure. And if, again, for whatever reason it doesn't work or she's struggling, there are people in the community, elders, both men and women alike, that they can kind of speak to. So for me, it's quite fascinating as well, because it's not everyone is supposed to have the answers. And that's why, especially like maybe in the West, we have this idea that, you've mastered everything, you've mastered something, and that's not always the case. And like I mentioned, you can be a master of a particular technique, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work with every woman. It's important that people kind of understand that, so you can kind of seek help with those who can kind of help and advise you on whatever you're going through.
Absolutely. Like I love how you bring that forward about environment where women can actually feel safe to release, right? And that requires safety, it requires trust in self and trust in partner. It there's so many different aspects. Like we could go all day on that. That you centered that's really really important. Mm, yeah. Have you looked into any studies that show relationships last longer through this practice? That is there an impact to the level of intimacy or pleasure or satisfaction in relationships where Kunyaza is centered?
Yeah, there's two that comes to mind. One I referenced in my book. I can't remember the lady's name, but she wrote a wonderful article. It's actually available on the internet. It's called The Joy of Kunyaza, where women's pleasure comes first. Again, forgive me, I forgot the lady's name, but she spoke about, and she interviewed a number of couples in Rwanda, some as in their 70s, some in their 80s, where they spoke about Kunyaza helping their marriage. And again, these are some of those couples were people that would be married for over like 40, 50 years. And then there was another article which was recently published in, I think, early this year by Jessica Peps. So she's a Swedish researcher she was researching Kunyaza and women's sexual pleasure both in Rwanda and Sweden. And she's got an interesting title. I think she called it Is Squirting a Superpower or a Source of Shame or something along those lines. And she was kind of investigating how, compared to like in Europe, compared to like in Central Africa, how women's sexual pleasure is viewed within the context of like a long-term relationship, and whether it does help women in a long run. And what I found quite interesting in both of those studies, especially the former study with the woman, I forgot her name, is that the women, oftentimes the women were speaking about themselves first and foremost. So yes, they're in this relationship, but it was centered about their pleasure. And one of the man, he was called Felix, I believe his name was, I think it was about 60 or 68, and he said like, sex is for the woman. I'm just there to kind of facilitate. So it's how they view sex. And I think it's important, especially as men, because generally speaking, and I think a lot of men, we're quite goal orientated, and it's relatively somewhat easy in order for us to experience sexual satisfaction, whether it's form of an orgasm or ejaculation. And oftentimes as men, we're focused on performance, whereas with women, oftentimes what I hear is about how to access pleasure. And especially if we want to talk about pleasure, because generally that's not really an issue for a number of men, it's how do they somewhat improve their performance where it's more aligned with women, where it's about focusing on pleasure. Because we're just talking about performance and how long you last in the bedroom, or how that's like a male conversation. It doesn't necessarily equate to pleasure. But when we're talking about pleasure, it's a total different conversation, and it's a total different way that we even as men have to view sex and sexuality, and even for women herself. Because if we're talking about pleasure, that can change over a period of time. In terms, they can change depending on how the person's mood is or what stage they are in life. And for that, you need to constant dialogue and understand, okay, what may have been pleasurable to you as a 22-year-old is something. Now in your mid-30s, it might be something totally different. Now in your 60s and 70s, it might be totally different. So I think, and that's why I entitled the book The Secret to Female Pleasure, as opposed to The Secret to Orgasms or Ejaculation, or because these are things that, because you can have a pleasurable experience without necessarily being intimate with someone. You can have a pleasurable experience without having sexual intercourse. And that's why if we look at it like that, and if you look at pleasure more holistically, then even as a man, you could be in a loving, committed relationship, pleasurable relationship, and the kunyaza that you're having might not necessarily involve any form of intercourse. And that also helps men who are, again, because I speak to a number of men, especially those who are suffering from erectile dysfunction and impotence or some mild forms. It can help in that respect, because for a lot of men, we value our sexual identity is linked to our erection. And if a man is struggling with his erection, either he's unable to have a sufficient erection in order to please his partner, and that might be not only that he can't have an erection, but he can't last long enough. And because, again, a lot of men have been miseducated by porn, we think that we need to last like 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. And if you aren't able to reach those levels in terms of your performance, you feel somewhat inadequate. So that's why, but again, if we look at intimacy and sex in terms of being a pleasurable experience where you don't necessarily need to penetrate, and you've got like the Kunyaza practice, which is an example of that, which is non-penetrative, then again, that changes how we view pleasure and how we and how we view like a relationship. But if we think about, you know, like having a long-lasting relationship, meaning having X amount of sex sessions or X amount of positions or X amount of orgasms, it's more performative. And I think that's something which the Kunyaza tradition is more about pleasure. And again, like I said, that can change and can vary from person to person and couple to couple. So that's why I like to direct the conversation that way, rather than the performative kind of element, which is always kind of, you can quantify it and then people ask questions in terms of how many times can I make a woman squirt in X amount of periods and this, that, and the other. So, yeah.
Oh, that's really good to center. I do completely agree with you on the performative side of it. When I will have a lot of women come to me and be like, I want to have an orgasm, I want to ejaculate, right? And one of the first questions I ask them is, why are you trying to get to the why are you trying to get to the end of it? Because after that, unless
Yeah.
you're having multiple rounds of intercourse, sex, and intimacy, like that's it. And
Yeah.
and also because it drives excitement in your partner, it could be it for that person too, and so they have to ask themselves, why am I trying to get the pleasure? Why not stay in this pleasure space? Why am I uncomfortable with pleasure? Am I so comfortable not being in pleasure that when I'm in pleasure, I'm trying to get to the end of it? Like, there's this conversation brings up all of the things that in and direct the behaviors around pleasure, right? um, when it comes to like men in this performative nature, yeah, ejaculation is like really important, right? And orgasms are really important, but like there's a whole thing, right? Because once the man releases vasopressin, that particular hormone that is going to attach to a person. So it's really important that when men are, seeking to explore orgasms, that they realize that when they do this, they release a specific type of hormone that attaches itself to a woman and will make them want to protect and provide. And we call it the jealousy hormone, right? And so, like we have to be really mindful of like just throwing orgasm all over the place and around. In and around different relationships, which is a total different thing. But I love the fact that it offers a path for non-penetrative sex. Because when I am teaching the fertility awareness method, when the female's fertile and closes, that period of time, it's if you're trying to avoid sex, you either have to be, I mean, if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, you either have to be really good at pulling out, right? Which cannot be validated by somebody saying, I haven't had any babies yet, right? It like Kunyaza is an opportunity to see how well man edges on erections and ejaculations and like what his control is, right? But also, if you do want to be able to have connection and intimacy and sexual play, Kunyaza is like a wonderful opportunity, fertile window to explore that and stay in physical contact with your partner in a very way. So I love it for that. And then you made a really great point, is that orgasmic pleasure changes from woman to woman, era to era within a woman, but also it can be dependent on the healing needs of a woman, right? Because it's through orgasm and female ejaculation that the body flushes itself. It's like a detox and cleanse. It removes cellular debris, byproducts, toxins, right? And it like renews the body. So there's like this healing effect. And so some people who are really struggling with their health will be intuitively drawn to sex because of the endorphins that are released, because of the hormonal action at play, the biochemical responses, and the detoxification process that happens. But then even more so, women not only change from year to year, and not only is healing a factor, but the cycle, the female ovulatory cycle is a factor, right? We have 4 different phases with different hormones that are dominant depending on what phase we're in. And because of those changing dominant hormones, our access to pleasure changes as well, right? So, like in the follicular phase, that is when estrogen is beginning to rise, all the way to the ovulatory phase where estrogen reaches, there's going to be a, a raising of the cervix to elongate the vaginal canal. There's going to be different types of cervical fluid and mucus that is released from the cervical crypts that give a different level of sensation of pleasure, right? During this time, like, women are social, more engaged. They're seeking to connect and experience love, right? We're designed this way to set us up for procreation by the time we ovulate, right? So this is a time where pleasure is really easy from an accessible perspective, right? But as soon as a woman ovulates, right, the egg is propelled out of the follicle turns into an endocrine gland and releases progesterone. The whole game changes, because, like, estrogen being this huge proliferator, this huge growth hormone, is then met by progesterone to stabilize it, and the cervix hardens, it lowers, it shortens the vaginal canal. And then the types of cervical fluid that are released at that time is very different, because this mucus plug is formed at the cervix to make sure nothing goes in and out during this luteal phase, which means you're not going to have all of the lubricative mucus that you would normally have during the first half of your cycle. So pleasure and orgasm will be experienced in a different way. There may be more stimulation and needed during the arousal phase that takes a lot more time. So that's like the beautiful complexity of women, is not only does it change based on our where we are as women, whether we're in our fertile years or we're in perimenopause or in menopause, or if we're experiencing a lot of chronic stress in our lives, if there is physiological healing. But every cycle, there are 4 different phases that change the way we access pleasure. So what I love about Kunyaza to bring together is that this practice helps men understand the body of the woman and everything that makes her who she is throughout all of the changes. It gets to be a different experience every day. If a couple decided to have sex for 30 days straight, it's going to be a different experience every single day and every single cycle, because the cycle is different from month to month. Every single cycle. When she ovulates is going to be different. I can ovulate on the 7th this month, the 14th next month, the 22nd the next month, the 10th the next month, because external factors play a key role in that process. Our body, the woman's body, is always going to prioritize stress over procreation, stress over birthing, right? And so when that happens, the body holds off on ovulation, right? And the only way ovulation happens is if estrogen is not rising to the threshold to trigger luteinizing hormone to push the egg out. So if estrogen is not rising to the threshold, that means there's less luscious, gooey, wet, watery, gushing cervical fluid. You see? So, like, I'm so thankful that you brought that part to the conversation, because women are extremely complex and dynamic. And when a man can become curious and decide to explore his partner in this very meticulous way, slowing everything down, I, I believe that the connection um, is one that can only deepen over time.
Oh,
It's beautiful. it's beautiful. Like I love for this reason. And so like that's I was like I have to I have to have you on. Everybody, me and Habib, we can get on the phone and talk for hours about all of this this work. Like I look, y'all, I have like 1,000 things I wanted to talk about, but I know like also you're on a time frame as well. Um, what do you think? What do you think, Habib? You think we're like at a good stopping place? Should we look at some questions? What do we need to cover? What have I not asked that like we really should center, or you think we got a good like first session in? What do you think? Tell me.
Um, a question for you. I love what you spoke about. I'm just wondering some advice, if you can give us some, please. What advice would you give to help? Because I loved what you spoke about in terms of helping men become curious and inquisitive and exploring their partner. What advice can you give to help men get to that point? Because that's something that I'm trying to help with. Because I agree with you, but I'm saying what else for those who are not maybe even naturally curious or that way inclined, what advice would you give to those men, or especially their female partners who are trying to, any maybe someone that they're potentially seen or with, to kind of to have that particular mindset? 'Cause I think it's so important.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and it's come to me in different ways, right? I had, and I'm going to answer, but I want to preface it with this experience. So I was out to dinner with a set of friends, and we're very close. And I think once people know that I'm a clinical sexologist, like all the questions, every single question that they've ever wanted to ask in their life is like is presented in that moment. And I had this beautiful man. He's from another country outside of the United States, just gorgeous. Okay, and he shared with me that because he had an issue with an erection one time, right? He's like, he's now like traumatized when he's experiencing a new person because he doesn't know if it's going to happen, right? And so what I told him, which is where I'm going to segue to, is that the practice doesn't come in the moment. The practice of self-assurance and confidence and the knowing that you are prepared for all moments happens way before that. Um, and so I gave him some tips on like what he can do to be ready for the next time he wants to make love with a woman. And so what I'll say is this: the answer is in the question. It's a mindset. And so when I'm working with couples that are desiring to deepen their relationship, right? Until couples don't come to me until they're in trouble, until there's a problem, right? I wish it was a norm for people to have a coach with them from day one and have like scheduled sessions for just in case, and having protected space to explore conversations that need to be had. Because here, families are not involved in a typically families are not involved in a positive way to support married couples. If anything, it's usually disruptive how families engage with couples that are married. But what I would say is that to feel comfortable in exploring and becoming curious about the body that you have to be curious about the woman that you're with, right? And so it comes up in asking deeper questions in the moment. It comes up in the desire to want to understand a person, right? And there's like so many examples. So let me see if I can give you a couple. So one of the that comes up within that I work with is the issue of automated thinking. Okay. And inability to ask for what they want. Okay, let me write this down so I don't get lost in this. Hold on. Automated thinking, I'm gonna talk about that, and not being able to ask for what they want. So automated thinking comes, like, an example of automated thinking is a woman does this thing and it creates an automated thought, uh, uh, automated assumption, if you will. And that assumption will typically lead to emotional feelings that lead to a change in attitude towards that person, and then ultimately a change in behavior, right? And so, like, because people are designed like this, our brains are designed like this, we lose the opportunity to learn more about who we're with. So let me break this down real quick. So when we talk about the mind, right? The mind, you got the conscious mind. Like, think of an iceberg. You got the conscious mind that's showing above the water. Then you got the shoreline. We call that the critical faculty. And then we've got the subconscious mind. The conscious mind is responsible for everything that you do. It is the aspect that allows you not to have to walk yourself through how to open a door. You just know how to open a door. You don't have to tell your body how to turn on the cook something. You don't have to tell your hand to open the door to get into a car, right? So when you think about all of the odd things we do, right, all day long, from the moment we wake up, that we have to tell our bodies what to do, that's a lot of responsibility. So when anything is complex, an idea, a behavior of a person comes into play, the conscious mind is like, nah, I don't have time for this. It kicks the response down to the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is like a bowl. It's a bowl of everything that you put into it. It's a bowl of everything that you've listened to in a song. It is everything that you watched on TV, including adult entertainment. It's every sitcom. It's everything you've seen on social media that's like, oh, if she's doing this, then this means that, right? It's all of your experiences, all of your trauma, it's all of your imprints that have been passed along to you through your family, your religious belief, your subconscious bowl. It's everything. So when a behavior shows up, your conscious mind is like, nah, I'm not dealing with that. It kicks the response to your subconscious mind, and your subconscious mind just throws anything out. It just throws anything out that's in the bowl. That's in the bowl. Okay. All right. This is where it gets good. So that is the automated response that you have, and it feels real, right? And our brain like this keep us out of danger, right? It's designed like this to remind us to run if we see a lion coming after us, or if there's a car that it's about to hit. We have automated thinking, but unfortunately, we apply this automated, and automated thinking leads us to a lot of assumptions, right? All right. And in those assumptions, we will decide on something and run with it, spiral with it, without it even being a fact until we examine that. So, like, I'll have a client that'll be like, he'll tell me something. And so the first thing I'll ask them, is this real? Is this a fact? Where did you get this from? Right? Let's examine that. Does this really resonate with you? Do you really believe this? Like, what's your body telling you? Do you feel this? And then I'll ask them, like, how does this make you feel? Like, what is your attitude to this? How do you behave differently, right? And then what I'll ask them is, what do you want to idealize? What feels better for you as a thought? What would you like to work towards? What do you truly want, right? And then once we reframe that thought, then I will ask them how that makes them feel, how that changes their attitude, what will change in their behaviors. And it sets people on a whole different trajectory on how they interact with the person. Okay. But how do you get there? How do you get from responding to automated thoughts and just going with that and instead becoming more curious? I'm almost where you asked this question, is the practice of pausing, the practice of taking a breath, the practice of meditation, right? All of these three things I see in Kunyaza. It slows things down. There's breath. It's a body meditation, right? So if you notice, the more you practice breaking down automated thoughts through slowing things down, through breath work, through meditation, right? You can catch yourself. You will begin to catch it before it gets too far and spiral down. And then what you will begin to do is begin to ask more questions. Instead of the automated thought, you'll begin to ask what this means. I noticed that this happened. Or you could even be more open, and you might say that when I saw the thing, it triggered a memory in me. And now I'm struggling with these feelings and these thoughts and associating with those with you. Can you help me? Can you work with me to help me understand what's happening? Right? So my answer to this is I can't tell men to just go be curious, right? The practice is in the process of being courageous enough to share yourself and want to learn more about the of your partner, the why they do, why they say certain things. Because when you get curious instead of responding out of assumption, if a person feels safe with you, they will begin to unfold their life, their history with you, and that creates the intimacy. And the more that you practice that, the better at curiosity, because the outcomes and the closeness that it brings for you. And that in and of itself is the daily practice of connecting with someone, so that when you actually are in sensuous and physical and intimate moments with a partner, it's an it becomes the automated response. It becomes automated action. You have to think of it, right? You just know to slow down. You just know to take a breath. You just know to pause. It's like if I said, okay, everybody, girls and guys, get together. All right. I want you, this is how you practice Kunyaza. I'm going to give y'all 5 minutes. Go. Everybody's diving in, right? And the outcome is different for everyone. However, if I gave instructions and I said, okay, now when you see her vulva, I want you to take a breath. I want you to slowly do this and slowly do that, right? Ease and become like gaze at her. It changes the whole experience. The problem is that people are rushing through relationships. They're rushing to get to know each other. Excuse me. They're not taking the time needed to have sensuous vibrational relationships that open one another to each other. I always tell men that, you know, they're like, I don't want to be vulnerable. And I'm like, you see vulnerability in a very negative way. If you can be open, that makes you strong. If you understand what I'm saying.
Very well said. Very well said. Sorry, do you want to get have you got a glass of water, or do you want me to take the lead? Is there any questions whilst you're here?
Take the lead. I hope that helped out a
Okay.
little bit. There's so
No, that
much
was
more.
very, very, very well said. I'm just going to look if anyone's got
Run
any
through
questions
it,
or.
grab some water.
Yeah, of course. So just for the benefit of those of you who are recently joined, so we're speaking about Kunyaza and the culture of mutual pleasure, with Elena Akiwo. It's her IG live. So who is a love coach, fertility coach. Also, yeah. Okay. Oh, so the comment. Yeah. So the article that I was referring to, someone's actually commented on it. Thank you. So the article I was referring to is by Alice McCall. So Alice McCall, MCCOOL, and the article is called "The Joy of Kunyaza: Why Women's Pleasure Comes First in Rwanda." Thank you, Pitch and Perfect, for that. Is there any other comments or questions? Um, I don't think we've got any questions. I think everyone is taking a lot what you've said.
Yeah, we did share a lot. I know Pitch Imperfect. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that he was able to join us. Yeah, so I think that goes.
We are oppressed in America when it comes to saying what we need in general of it is on an intimate level, from sensuality and a mental connection to intercourse.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have challenges asking for what they want, and that there's a reason for that, right? I think we've talked about that. Give me a second. I want to actually hit on that.
Okay, whilst you're, I can take the thought whilst you, if you need a bit more time. What did I also? Okay, so another comment. Actually, the act is synchronization of two energies, not intimating the things what you see for videos. Do you guys want to know? It's just a comment. Okay, and someone said, I'm really concerned that just because of the adult entertainment is majority losing satisfaction and not enjoying the act at that moment. I want to ask Habib Akande, why can't find his books as audio on Amazon? This would be easier for us to have them. Yeah, that's a good point. Quite lazy. I should look into that. Thank you for that. We all know that. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to whilst you're getting yourself together. Actually, there was something I wanted to talk about. I wanted to hear your thoughts. It's around because I had a workshop recently and I was speaking about I was trying to help men because there was a number of women in that have reached out and spoken about feeling somewhat not coerced, but they spoke about having intimate relations like with their long-term partner, their husband, when they wasn't 100% in the mood, and they spoke about and I mentioned like sex out of politeness, and they said yes, that's it. And then asked the men, do you know what that is or what that feels like? And they were like they couldn't understand what I meant by it. But then when I asked the women, like 95% understood like what it means to have sex out of politeness, or they've experienced that. And then one of the women said this is one of the challenges. It's like when we're speaking about certain topics like this, where like the idea of having sex out of politeness, that sometimes men are talking like safety or vulnerability. We're speaking the same language, but men don't understand maybe some of the terms that we're using. So some of the women was asking, how do you bridge that gap where men might not understand or their partner might not understand what they're kind of saying. And so I'll use like the whole concept of sex out of politeness as an example, because a lot of men that I spoke to, they didn't understand how a woman can have sex out of politeness, and how to break it down in the sense of, yeah, because obviously a woman's situation is generally different to a man. So even if you are, and especially if it's in a casual relationship, or it also could be in a long-term relationship or marriage, where a woman may feel that she doesn't necessarily want to have sex, but because she doesn't want to hurt his ego or upset him, or some cases the woman might fear this is the easier of the alternatives in terms of like something worse can happen, so she might have sex out of politeness. And it was something that the men initially couldn't grasp, and then they kind of understood, but they didn't. And these are men that, you know, some of them have been in like long-term relationships or marriages for a number of years, or had multiple sexual partners, didn't even understand that was a woman's experience. And I was like, that's maybe some of the challenges, is that when women are speaking, maybe either we don't understand the terms of the concept that they're using, or it needs to be broken down in layman's terms for us to understand, to really digest. Because then after they'll realize, oh, okay, now I get it. Because it didn't even cross their mind that they can have that. They thought that every time a woman, because I said sometimes a woman, yes, of course, no means no, but sometimes a woman doesn't say anything and she doesn't want it. We have to be able to recognize that. And that was something that, especially like in consent workshops, I'm trying to help men understand that it's not just no, but you have to be able to read her body language, or if she's not enthusiastically showing that she's interested, she doesn't want it. But it's like, the idea is, okay, what I've been taught is no means no. Unless she actually says no and vocalizes it, then it means yes. And I said, no, that's not necessarily the case, because I'm sure you've been in establishments or workplaces where you've been intimidated by someone, or you don't want to say, but you just keep quiet. So sometimes no, being silent doesn't mean, isn't necessarily mean that you approve of something that's been done to you. So yeah, that's just something that I just, have you had maybe similar experiences or challenges speaking, especially like speaking to men, in terms of understanding some of these concepts that you're speaking about, like vulnerability, safety, consent, where they can understand where the woman's coming from, or the woman's perspective?
Yes.
And how do you address those?
Mm.
Those.
Well, what I'll say is that this is such a good topic, because we would imagine that it might be women that just have issues with consent, with expressing their ecstatic yes and their hell no's, right? But what I've discovered is that men also have extreme difficulty with consent as well, because of the expectations that are placed on us from a different perspective. When I teach about consent, I use a model called the Wheel of Consent. And it examines relationships within 4 different quadrants: giving and receiving, taking and enduring. And when I talk with men, like, let me just say this, that even though this could be a very direct issue that a couple is having, I don't always address it in that very direct way. I will typically break it apart so we can talk about this in a way that they can have an experiential relatability. Okay.
Mm.
But in terms of the Wheel of Consent, what I have noticed with a lot of males as well is that because they don't know what how they be guided by transactional actions, where where instead of asking directly what they want, they will give something in hopes to receive. And when they don't receive, then they become resentful of not receiving what they had hoped for. Okay. What I have discovered is the reason for people not being able to ask for what they want is because of all of the social. And I give this example of how early, right? And all this matters what you're talking about right now. I'll always ask people, ever been in a room, you're sitting on a sofa and there's a table in the middle and there's like a little kid walking around the table, a 2-year-old, a toddler, a 1.5-year-old. leaning on the table, right? And they're reaching. You think that they're reaching for something on the table that can hurt them. But what's really happening, because of the proximity between their hips and the table, they're actually like rubbing on the table to experience pleasure. But we stop them from doing that, right? As children, we tend to stop kids from masturbating, right? We create a shameful environment when kids are exploring pleasure, because we attach sex to pleasure when pleasure can literally be in its own container, right? And so, because of that, and all of the religious and familial imprints and TV imprints, we begin to lose our voice at a very early age. And so we begin to master the practice of indirect routes of pleasure, which which come into like doing something to or for someone else, get them to do something for you so that you can experience the pleasure that you seek. That has become the norm. That has become the way that we are as a society when it in terms of like coupling and relating to other people. Okay. So by losing your authentic voice and your access to pleasure, you then have to find indirect routes of pleasure that when it comes to the wheel of consent can put you in a very transactional relationship, right? So what I've found is that not only will men give in hopes to receive, they will endure for their partner just because that makes them happy. And so women do too. As you can see, like women are faced with this same conundrum that men are. We all are dealing, right? In terms of gifts, the only way a gift is a real gift is if it's in one direction. Like there's nothing being returned. That's a gift. Otherwise, it's a transaction happening. Okay. And so because of this, the loss of your authentic voice, right? In a situation where a man may be wanting to make love with his woman and she just doing it, making love with him as a gift, or if he's taking it from her, then enduring this because she's lost her authentic voice. She is in this problematic space as well. They're both in this problematic space. What I have discovered with men, like I've had male clients who have been like, she won't have sex with me. I want to have sex with her. And when we really look at it, he really needs so much more intimacy and connection and closeness to be seen, to be heard. And oftentimes, men and women will use sex as a distraction to the work that is required in their relationship so that they can have their needs met. And I have found that the more unmet, unmet needs and unresolved emotional business that there is in a relationship, the more importance that's placed on sex. And so people are using sex to try to access what it is they need in the first place. And
so it's masking the deep issues. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like polite sex comes from women enduring and not communicating and losing their voice, right?
Mm.
Because you have to ask, why wouldn't a woman want to make love with her husband, right? There's some unresolved emotional business that needs to be taken care of, but she is not empowered, or she doesn't feel safe, or she hasn't ever practiced asking for what she wants directly. And the same thing with men, a higher priority may be placed on sex because of what he's experiencing in the moment. It might be dominant. It might be that he's being seen. It, any anything psychological. Also, like, not for nothing, Black men experience so much chronic stress, so much oppression, so much disrespect. And what I know for sure is that on the other side of orgasm, that is rest. It can be peace. And so sometimes men aren't looking for, like, they think they want the sex, but really what they want is rest. What they really want is the peace. What they really need is the feeling of love and softness and acceptance and whatever else comes to them in a biochemical perspective. um, Adrenaline, right? Adrenaline is oftentimes a huge reason why people seek sex. Dopamine can be another reason why people seek sex. So if, let's say, a man is dealing with a lot of chronic stress, right? And that is, stress can be opening a bill in the mail, depending on where your threshold is at. The brain doesn't distinguish you running from a lion and you opening up a bill. It's going to tell your adrenals, the HPA axis, your hypothalamus adrenal axis, that you need to produce cortisol. Okay? Cortisol, the building blocks of cortisol come from sex hormones. Okay? If you are chronically stressed, eventually your adrenals are going to get shot out. So where do you get your go from, your ambition from, your drive from? That's going to have to come from other biochemicals like adrenaline, like dopamine, right? So oftentimes men are not, it's not that it's sex that they need, it's the energy that they need that they get from it. It's the peace that they get from it. It's the connection, it's the love, it's the touch that they don't know how to ask for, right? The listening that they don't know how to ask for, because men are often boxed in and told you're not supposed to feel, you're not supposed to, like, relax and let your guard down. You know, there's a lot that people are seeking through the pathway of sex that has more to do with what's on the other side of it than actual sex. So when I get a couple together, my goal is to unfold all of that and see what this is really, really about. If it's a woman, why do you not want to connect with your man? If this feels like you're in polite sex. And if it's a man and everything is about sex, what is it really about? What is it that you really need? And at the core of it is usually intimacy. It's usually closeness. Like, I need to feel close. Like, the beautiful thing about a woman, when she has sex, she releases a ton of oxytocins, right? Everybody knows this. Hugs, kisses, making love, that equals oxytocin for women. Okay, this oxytocin doesn't just sit in our body. These hormones pour out of our pores. And so, like, you can't see it, but we're like releasing this magic. And men receive that are in proximity to us. This is how women can end up, having the same period as all the women that are around them on a daily basis, because the hormones are excreted out of the body and other women absorb them, and then women end up on the same cycle. See, like, what we don't see is where all the answers are. What's not said is where all of the answers are, right? And so, like, to tie this all in, that's one of the reasons why I love Kunyaza, because it is a practice of slowing down. It is a practice of seeing. It is a practice of being heard and being listened to. It is a listening skill. It's a sensuous experience to have to like pay attention to details, sounds. This is like a time where you can be connected with someone and activate every single sense, right? To become really emboldened with this and transfer that into your life, you have to start with speaking your authentic voice, truly asking for what you need and practicing that, right? Being courageous to have conversations and understand. And also, we really need some good understanding about the biochemicals that are happening in our bodies, right? I hear like porn is always a big discussion, especially in your container on your Instagram. That's consistently brought up, right? And how that um plays into the experiencing of couples and sexual, sexually and intimately, right? The like one like when I think in terms of like the bio processes that are happen that um that cause adult entertainment to become um problematic for intimate relationships is when you are watching porn, right, that anticipation of what is about to be shown to you shoots up your dopamine, right? And in order to experience that same excitement and sensation, you have to watch more adult entertainment in different types, right? But what happens is at a certain point, that hormone has a threshold too. Just like estrogen has a threshold that triggers luteinizing hormone to propel the egg out for ovulation, dopamine has a threshold too. And then you have these cells that have hold on, I paused. You have these cells that have dopamine receptors that can no longer absorb the dopamine. And so you can't experience anticipation anymore. You can't access the pleasure that you've been accessing anymore. And that's where you run into that wall. Like people will say, like, I can't get excited anymore. I can't enjoy my life anymore, my girlfriend or my partner, right? And dopamine is dopamine, whether it's men or women, okay? Like we all have the factors that create dopamine in our bodies. So aside from the emotional aspects, like the rules of marriage, religious connotations, we do have to examine the biochemical reactions that are happening in our body. And when I notice that this comes up in relationships, it requires a reset. So typically, I will have my couples or individuals enter into a sexual sobriety contract with me, right? We're going to detox. We're going to enliven our spiritual practices, right? And reset our bodies so that the dopamine anticipation drug, this biochemical in our body, the cell receptors will again be able to receive. So like I know a lot of information. This is like the science of sex. Like I love getting into the science of sex, and relating and connecting and things like that. But the bottom line, there is a way through all of this to have deeper relationships, and we just need to have more communication, more community around these topics so that we can like support couples that truly desire to be with each other. I firmly believe that like there's hardly any situations outside of violence that a couple can't deepen their relationship with just like some support. And I know I took a long like path to that answer, but yeah.
No, it's very insightful and it's very, very profound answer. So much appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. You're so quiet right now. I don't know what to think.
No, I'm taking it in. I'm taking it in. I'm taking it in. There was a lot
Okay.
that you had to, yeah. Sorry, maybe I'm a bit slow, but when there's when I take new information, I need time to kind of digest and to to try and retain it as well, and to obviously try and make it make sense for me. In order, that's how I retain information. Kind of thing. Obviously, I want to listen to this again, but there was a lot that you said that made me kind of reflect and think and look at things differently. So I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a good point. So for anybody that's listening to this, like, oftentimes if we hold what's inside of us, our authentic voice, and then we just unload on our partners, we're
Yeah,
typically expecting like an immediate response. What do you have to say about this? Well, our partners need to process things too. And this is where that slowing, that pause, that breath, taking time to absorb what each other is sharing is so very, very important. I break this down in my courses. Like I have the Courage to Love masterclass that's 3 days. It's like an immersive experiencing and understanding the science of relating and the science of coupling and breakups and all kinds of things like that. That's in January. Then I have my men's and women's courses, and it takes me about 3 to 4 months to like teach these practices in my cohorts. So I just love it. And you and we can come back to this over and over and over
yeah, and sorry, just for the benefit of those, obviously I know this is on your page, but people who may be listening that are not have first come across your work, and obviously I will share this live. Where can people find your courses, like you said, in your work, if you don't mind letting people know? And also I'll make sure I'll attach that when I upload this and
again.
put a link to your website and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So it's available in my link bio, and then on my website, elenalakay.com. And I am undergoing like a huge rebrand and stuff now that I'm finally launching my men's only program as well. I've been working with men for 10 to 15 years in this work of men's health and wellness, for a very long time. I don't create courses until I have had a lot of training and clinical and experiencing with couples, to actually, or men or women individually, to actually like roll something out. I design programs and courses that are based on the work that I've done. And I work with clients all over the world. I have in the Middle East, Kuwait, Dubai, Africa, Canada, like the Caribbean, the United States, everywhere. And so I
And I,
also
yeah.
one with.
And do you also, and I think I know the answer, but just for the benefit of people listening, do you also offer courses for single men or men who've gone through like infidelity or breakup? Is it just for people that are in relationships and married, or also are there any courses for people who are single or
That's
who are experiencing heartbreak?
Yes, that's wonderful. So the men's program that's being rolled out is for single or coupled men. I have 2 retreats that I do. I have one retreat that is in July, from the 7th through the 13th, and that is for single people who desire to consciously couple. So like I talk about, this is set up for that. That retreat is for that. And then I do a couples retreat. And then I work with men individually. And then I work with men in couple relationships as well. And to your point, what really launched my work as a sexual relationship strategist were the calls that I was getting from men who were being exposed of their infidelity and wanted to save their relationships. And so, it started first with NFL players and other high profile clients. And, I work with, men that work in all different types of jobs, billionaires, and I've worked with homeless men, so there's a huge spectrum of men that I've worked with that come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. I've been able to really help a lot of couples. And it's not just men. Like, I also get a lot of phone calls from women. I have one that I just cycled out. She contacted me because, she had begun a telephone relationship with someone and was considering like blowing up her whole marriage and on him, and she reached out to me because she wanted to see if there was anything that she could do first to save her. And so I started working with her, and then we brought the husband in to the sessions, and then I started working with him individually and then them as a couple. So that's typically what will happen. One of the couple, one person will reach out to me, I'll be working with them, we bring in the other person, and then I work with them individually as a couple. And then of course individuals as well that are not coupled up, maybe want to be coupled or need some time of oneness. I get all types of things. People that are wanting to practice celibacy, just overhaul their, deconstruct their relationships and their sexual experiences so that they can show up for the people that they are experiencing in the future. So, a lot of different dynamics. And I love the work. So I hope that answers.
Amazing, phenomenal work.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel so good about this call. I think we have to do it more often, and
Yeah.
and also maybe even prep and ask people to submit their questions, and then we just dive in and start going in on the questions.
Yeah. I'm not usually when I do IG such lives, a lot of the questions comes after, and I'm aware people DM me or so, and especially from the men as well. So I understand generally a lot of people, again, because of some people feel ashamed or embarrassed to talk certain questions. So I understand, and I expect that kind of thing. But again, as long as people we're having this conversation publicly, people can hopefully benefit from it. And also, if they want to reach out, both of our DMs are open. And again, obviously, your courses, which you said are kicking off in January, so people can both men and women alike and couples can sign in and learn more. But this is just a taste of the work, the great work that you're doing. So.
They can DM me too. I typically interview people before I work them and before they enroll in class to make sure that it's a best fit, especially for my retreats because they're extremely intentional, and I will make sure that everyone is safe and ready for that type of exploration because they can be hands-on. They're very somatic in nature. There's a lot of practice involved in engagement. A lot of us, I think one of the major differences between me and other coaches out there is that I think other coaches do very well just telling people what they should do. Here's the answer to this. Whereas I take people through a process because that's really the only way the brain takes something new into the body to actually engage. And so all of my work is very process oriented. We did get a question. How it says how do you talk about sexual expectations before getting married? That is a loaded question, and I would really like to get into that. And I think maybe Habib, we pick another day to come back to those questions
Yep,
like
sure.
this, ask and then get into it because
Yep.
that's a loaded process, and
Great.
it is a conversation process that should be had before all marriages in some way. And there's lots of different ways to talk about what you envision to share with your partner for marriage in terms of sex. Because, sexual compatibility is really important. But no matter what, no matter how deep in someone's sexual prowess is, the person that you're going to be with is nothing like any other person that you've been with. And so there's going to be a learning curve that has to be met. Everything changes. And so rather than thinking of talking about sexual expectations, I would reframe that to really talk about what um, what where you are at sexually, your experiences so far, what you envision, what you desire, how you want to be collaborative in deepening the intimacy of relationships. There, I would just take a completely different approach versus expectation, because with intention and curiosity, you end up exactly where you will. Okay. Wonderful.
Well
All right,
said.
I love.
It's been a pleasure. It's been amazing. We definitely have to look and do this again. And yeah, we're probably early in the new year when you kick off your. We did speak on my platform when you kick off your courses. I love to host you on my platform.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, I'll share this, and obviously, yeah, so people can obviously, like I said, by all means, follow your work and sign up on your courses.
Mm.
It's a part of your work. Appreciate the work that you're doing. So please keep it up.
And you as well. I'm so thankful for all that you've poured into your books, and you are freeing so many people by what you're sharing and all of the research that has gone into the work that you're publishing. Phenomenal, Habib, and I thank you for everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Have a good day, evening, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Speak to you soon.
Everyone, peace.
Bye.